Being completely retarded is going to help you close more B2B sales. I know it sounds crazy, but in today's video, I'm going to break down exactly how that is. So, if there's one thing that I've learned managing hundreds of sales reps, it's this. The reps who assume they know everything, they actually lose the most deals. Assuming is the number one deal killer in B2B sales. And the moment you think you already know what the prospect needs, what they care about, or how they make decisions, you stop discovering. And essentially, once you stop discovering, you start selling in the dark. I've managed reps in multiple industries, both B2C and now I'm focusing on B2B. And something I noticed early on completely changed how I think about selling. The guys who knew everything about the product, every feature, every competitor, and every technical detail, a lot of times they actually sold less than the ones who just showed up curious. Because it's not that product knowledge isn't important. Obviously, you need to go ahead and do your research on what you're selling. But knowledge without curiosity makes you sound like a brochure, and no one buys from a brochure. The less scripted guys, the ones who didn't try to sound like experts, they asked real questions. And essentially, they acted dumb. And they were closing circles around the quote unquote smart reps because they were learning in real time instead of assuming they already know. Because the biggest thing is you can't close deals through features. You don't close deals by showing people how much you know or what the feature does. You actually close deals by showing people how much you understand about that particular prospect. So features don't close, discovery does. People buy because of pain, uncertainty, ego, or pressure, not because your product has an extra automation or faster load speed. And the goal of discovery is really to find exactly what's really broken. And you can't find that if you're busy trying to prove how smart you are. Smart reps talk, but great reps ask. Most reps want to be the hero of the call, the one with all the answers. But the top closers know that the power is actually in the questions. And when you start to act retarded and play dumb, you're not just pretending to be clueless, you're showing that you're curious. And you're actually forced to listen to yourself and listen to the prospect instead of simply just pitching. And every single sentence a prospect says gives you more data that you can use later on to close them. The more a prospect talks, the more leverage you have because you only get data if you stop assuming and you start asking. These are some dumb questions that win deals because the best discovery questions, they sound simple and almost too simple, but they go deep very, very fast. A lot of times if a prospect says, for example, let's say you are selling an automation software. Let's say that they are dealing with an organization. A good question would be, an organization? How specifically is it unorganized? See how simple that is. Instead of you just taking it at face value, you're getting more information to use and leverage later on the call. Because maybe the prospect already, maybe briefly mentioned how it's unorganized, but you always want to get more information so you can use that as leverage in the call. For example, hey man, could you walk me through that again? Or hey, I might be missing something. Can you explain how that typically happens? Or you mentioned that's frustrating. I guess what makes it frustrating? And there's 100 different examples that I could use. If a prospect says, "Hey, my software right now is very expensive," it's like, expensive, expensive, right? Very simple. You're just repeating what they said back to you to get them to give you more information. And these are essentially what I call invisible questions. They don't sound smart, they don't sound rehearsed, but they get the buyer talking. And when the buyer is talking, the sales rep is ultimately winning. So I want to go over the 3-layer rule: facts, feelings, and fallout. Every answer a prospect gives you has 3 layers. Number 1, the facts. What is actually happening? Number 2, feelings, how it's affecting them. And then number 3, the fallout. What happens if it doesn't change? For example, let's say a prospect says, let's say we are talking about like sales training, you're doing B2B sales training. Prospect says, hey, we're not following up on enough leads. Hey man, got it. What happens when that doesn't get fixed? Prospect says, well, we'll lose deals. Okay. How does that affect you personally? Prospect mentions, hey, it's a lot, very, very frustrating. I feel like the team's underperforming. From there, it's like, underperforming how? And then, you're continually probing in to their feelings and getting the prospect to open up more. The more the prospect opens up, the more leverage you have in the call. A, quote unquote, smart sales rep, the sales rep who's a know-it-all, maybe you say we're not following up on enough leads, and in their mind they're saying, oh, well, you're losing out on a bunch of deals. You can think that in your mind, but never assume it. Always act dumb and continue to ask those obvious questions, because ultimately you want the prospect to say it to themselves, because people change internally rather than externally. And like I said, endless probing equals endless leverage. Every time you think you know enough, ask one more question. The more you assume, the less control you have. The more you probe, the more leverage you build. That leverage isn't manipulation, it's actually understanding. Because now when you finally present your solution, it doesn't feel like a pitch, it feels more like a custom fit solution to everything they've told you. So going back to one of my other videos that I created, when we talk about the type A buyer, in B2B sales, about 60% of business owners are going to be type A personalities. So with these, one of the hardest people to sell is going to be a type A personality, the confident, successful, and high ego buyer. But here's what most reps don't realize. These guys actually have more pain than anyone. Type A feel immense pain when they're not living up to their potential, even if on the outside they're doing better than everyone else. So your job is to make them feel that pain while still making them feel like they're in control. Here are some example questions you should ask. Hey man, you're clearly performing at a high level. What's the next level look like for you? Or hey man, what happens if you stay at 80% of your potential another year? Or, for example, let's say a prospect says, well, I'm not living up to my potential. It's like, not living up to your potential. Could you clarify what you mean by that? Or let's say a prospect says, hey, yeah, man, we're doing solid. It's like, yeah, I guess, solid. Are you looking to stay solid? Kind of just probing and repeating back to exactly what they are saying. Ultimately, being dumb gives you more control on a sales call. The paradox is that acting more retarded gives you more control, because when you're asking, you are leading, and when you're listening, you're learning, and when you're learning, you have the leverage. Every word the buyer gives you to close them, and that's exactly how you win. Not by being the smartest person in the room, but by being the most curious. So just to wrap this up, assuming loses deals, curiosity closes them. You don't have to act like the expert. You just have to act like the student who asks the right questions. The best closers do not talk the most. They discover the most. So stop assuming and stay curious. Act more retarded, ask more questions, and ultimately make a fuck ton more money in sales. So if you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you on the next one.